In our study of John today, we come to one of the more important events in the life of Christ. It raises the temperature level for those who believed, but also for those with disbelief. It showed him as a man as he came onto a morning scene, and we saw this morning in class that he looked in John 11, verse 13. He saw her weeping, Mary, and the Jews who had come along with her weeping, and he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord." And Jesus wept. We made the observation that that concept of moved in spirit and troubled has an element of indignation to it, of anger. Jesus was angry that sin was affecting people so much. Of course, when he was raised from the dead, he defeated the last enemy as it related to death. And he knew that was coming, but he was moved and troubled in that circumstance. That weeping was not an uncontrolled tears, but it was certainly a human response to what he was seeing. Others were crying tears, so did he, as he comes to this scene. And so we come to verse 38. Jesus once more deeply moved, same word, indignation, an element of anger, and he came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance, and he said, "Take away the stone." "But Lord," Martha, the sister of the dead man, said, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." And then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" And we see that earlier in this chapter, and we looked at it during the class this morning. I want to take us back to John 9, a similar statement there when they questioned who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind. John 9, verse 3, "Neither this man nor his parents died, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life." There's a reasoning behind it, and it's certainly that the work of God could be seen. The healing, which Jesus brought about, would be associated with God, and God would be acknowledged here. God would be honored here. And here he says, did you not remember that I told you you would see the glory of God? So again, Jesus has a purpose in what he's doing. That probably tells us his purpose in not going to Bethany so early. It probably explains why he let the body be in the tomb for 4 days. Difficult from a human point of view, but from a spiritual perspective, the greater good is that they would see the glory of God at the end of this circumstance. We've often wondered the humanity of Jesus and understanding what's given to us here, but we also are given the humanity of people who came to comfort Mary and Martha, and certainly the disciples who would be there as well. We see the human element, but Jesus was always able to pull back and make a decision based on that which would glorify God, and that which would sustain and prove who he was. "I am the Son of God." As Nicodemus in John 3 says, no one could perform such miracles except one who came from God. So all of these ideas give us the reasoning behind God's actions through Christ, and the benefit to be derived from his allowing a friend to die, the turmoil, the mourning, the difficulty, and the 4 days of grieving. And he says, "Remove the stone." And so they took away the stone, verse 41. And Jesus looked up and says, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." Now John gives us a detail to, again, explain something to us. Jesus often says and does things not for his benefit. He knew that the Father listened to him, but he wanted the people to acknowledge what was taking place. To say it's slightly different, this isn't about me, it's only about him, the Father. It's only about bringing glory to him, the glory of God. And so what I'm saying is not for my benefit, I'm saying it for the benefit of those who are here, so that they might hear it. And we'll see the same thing in other instances in John's Gospel as we work through future chapters. And when he had said this, he called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" I'm sure it was louder than that. I did not want to wake up crying children. I heard someone a number of years ago, I'm not remembering who, but what he said I've remembered since, and I believe it to be true. If Jesus had not said the name Lazarus, many others would have come out of their tomb. He specifies who is to come out with the name, Lazarus, come out. And if he had not said the name of Lazarus, others could have come out because God was at work here, whether the tomb was open or not. So that's a discussion that some would alter their thinking. But the bottom line is, Lazarus, come out. Very specific, not leaving it open for any misunderstanding, and certainly not calling others out from their burial. And there are those who wonder, why did Jesus not heal more? Why did he not raise more from the dead? This is the third time. Why did he not heal every leper that ever walked on earth during his 3 years of ministry? Why would everybody not be healed physically? And then as soon as we ask those questions, we realize he didn't come as the great physician to heal every physical ailment upon earth. He came to use the circumstances given to him to show the work of God or the glory of God. And it attested to who he was. And it attested in John's mind to increasing their information so as to believe that he was the Son of God. All of this, from John's perspective, is given so that we might believe that Jesus is the Son of God. And in a moment, when we move further, we're going to think, how foolish are the people there? How hard-headed, how hard-hearted they were. But let's let John get us there in another verse or two. Lazarus, come out. And in verse 44, the dead man came out. And his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. It had been prepared for burial. And Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Such a practical statement, such a practical circumstance, such a practical set of circumstances taking place here. John doesn't make it anything greater than it already is. I think in a way John wants us to see a dead man named Lazarus, but when he says Lazarus come out, John says a dead man came out. The emphasis is on Jesus. The emphasis is on what Jesus did. The emphasis is not about all the grave clothes, how many were there, who put them on, all the other things that could be discussed. John, in a very practical way, lets us see Lazarus come out, and this dead man, Lazarus, did come out. And Jesus offered simple, pragmatic steps. Let him go into the community, so let's remove the grave clothes. And of course, that's what occurred. If we were to choose a miracle that Jesus performed, this might be the one we would choose. It's powerful and it's dynamic in its application. And how could anyone, if you knew at all anything about this family and about the mourners, this was not a pretense. It was not something predetermined so as to give a false narrative to any person. It's a reality check for those in that time to see once and for all, if ever you're going to understand who Jesus is. John presents it in such a way as to this should be the event that takes place. And we're not surprised the way the chapter continues. Two therefores. I had a preacher friend a number of years ago, when you see the word therefore, see what it's there for. He repeated it so often we just shook our head. Oh, there it is again. But it's true. The Bible is filled with therefores. And it's the conclusion, remember, to what we projected through this study. John pulls the camera and he puts this in a circumstance with people in that camera view, if you will. And he lets us see what's said and done, and then the camera pulls back and we see the response. Did it bring forth belief? Is John's goal. In choosing what he wrote about, did they come to believe in Jesus as the Son of God? And the first therefore in verse 45, therefore many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. So the result that we would have wanted, the result, they saw the glory of God, they believed that it really happened, first-hand witness, and they put their faith in him. But, there's always a but, some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. And then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. 72 members of a religious body that eventually decided under their tradition that Jesus was deserving of crucifixion. In Acts, we see the Sanhedrin meeting and calling in disciples and encouraging to quit saying the things you're saying, that Jesus has raised from the dead. Quit doing what you're doing, again using their religious power of the day. And their question on this occasion, what are we accomplishing? We know that at one point in John 6 wanted to take Jesus and make him king by force. We know at other times they have worked deviously to prove things or to test him in order to prove things so that they would feel legitimate in putting him to death. And now they raise the hypothetical question, what are we accomplishing? And of course, to this point, the answer speaks for itself, probably nothing at all, because he's still doing those things. I doubt that they said out loud, he raised someone from the dead. They couldn't admit that truthfully to themselves. But they did want to acknowledge that here is this man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away our place and our nation. The alternate rendering in study Bibles is take away our temple. So take away our rights religiously. Take away our temple and our nation. And one of them, named Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, spoke up and says, you know nothing at all. Do you not realize that it's better for you to let one man die for the people than for the whole nation, than that the whole nation perish? In other words, if he dies, this will go away. Don't make a rash decision knowing that it will have consequences among the people. And John gives us later his appreciation for what was said. And of course, he wasn't there, so the Spirit guided him to know what was said. And he did not say this on his own, but as high priest that year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation. And Old Testament prophecy spoke to that. And they said such things to Herod when he wanted to know where this child was born. So that's not really a surprise. Those in power physical power, government power, spiritual power, had some understanding of what this meant, of what this person might have been sent to do. And Caiaphas the high priest, not the member of the Sanhedrin, it seems to suggest, as high priest he knew this, not because he was a member of the Sanhedrin. And so from this day they plotted to take his life. My response in a simple way is they didn't get it. They did not get it. He just said words that meant something, could have changed their thinking, could have guided them down a different road. They did not listen, we're not surprised, and they decided that we need to plot even more so for his life. And therefore, another therefore, because knowing this would happen, Jesus no longer moved publicly among the Jews. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the desert, a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. And when it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, many went up from the country to Jerusalem for their ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. They kept looking for Jesus, and as they stood in the temple area, they asked one another, "What do you think? Is he coming to the feast at all?" But the chief priests and the Pharisees had given order that if anyone found out where he was, they would report it so that they might arrest him. John is setting the scene, and we'll see it in the sermon next week, Lord willing, into the triumphal entry of this Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And we're told that they, verse 9 of chapter 12, the large crowds of Jews found out that Jesus was there. This was in Bethany. We looked at that in class. Whom he raised from the dead. They not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Jesus as well. To kill Lazarus as well. For on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and putting their faith in him. Lazarus and the raising from the dead was a big deal. And Jesus knew it was. And he knew the effect that would come. And he begins preparing for the disciples for his coming death. We'll spend some time with Jesus in the upper room in coming lessons. We'll hear and see those heart-to-heart moments that he has with these chosen disciples. But the reality is it's all building to a crescendo. And the whole world is going to see, if you will, just explode when the Passover and the thousands who come to Passover anyway, and the word gets out of Jesus, his miracles, his words, his works, and his raising Lazarus from the dead, it all comes to a crescendo. And it's a pretty sight to see. It's a marvelous sound to hear. I'm whetting your appetite for next Sunday morning sermon. But it's a joyous moment. A joyous moment. Those leading singing next Sunday, let's at least sing a couple of songs of praise. Let's sing praises to God, the Creator and the Giver of eternal life. That's what they were doing. That's what we will do next week. Let's step back and see ourselves in the mirror for a moment. Do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? And by faith, having seen and had it attested to that he raised Lazarus from the dead, does that affirm your belief? Or if your faith is weaker, does it give you a strength to think differently and to stand up boldly for this one who can raise the dead? And by the way, we long for that time when we will be raised to go into those heavenly places it's hard to put this into a context if we don't apply it to us. We are following someone who raised from the dead, but had the ability to raise others from the dead in his public ministry. And there's no one else that we should ever deviate from in our thinking. And our passion should be very high for that one. And we should not have any ambivalence, if you will. We're tossed to and fro of unbelief or belief. Just settle the matter and give yourself to this Prince of Peace, who eventually will raise from the dead and will one day come back to get us. It's a plea from God himself through this message of John to place your faith in Jesus Christ the Messiah and make him your own. And that's the way I want us to close this morning. We'll sing a song of encouragement. Encourage those who haven't repented of sin and confessed his name and been willing to die to self, buried in water, immersion, in order to have sins forgiven, to receive the indwelling Spirit, the guilt-free conscience, and to be part of the family of God, to be one of his children. He looks at us as a babe. We have a couple of younger babes here, desiring milk, needing milk, but growing because of it. And that would speak to most of us. What's your need this morning? Respond appropriately as we stand and sing.